For me, it was about finding the right fit when it came to a job. 18 months after leaving the military, where I worked as a field medic, I'd already been through 4 different jobs and wound up quitting every single one. A few weeks after leaving my last position, a home care agency reached out to me about an opening for a night nurse at the home of a longtime patient. The prospect of working a night shift and simplicity of focusing on a single individual was appealing and unique from my previous jobs. I ultimately accepted the position, and after 2 weeks of orientation training was ready to get started. The patient's name was Rudolph Tweeg. He was 104 years old and suffered a stroke about 25 years ago that put him in a catatonic state. He couldn't move or speak and would need to have everything done for him, from nourishment to bathing and transportation. Apparently, he was a very wealthy man and lived in a large house where he wanted to remain in lieu of being transferred to a medical care facility. Aside from my full-time work, I like to write and keep journals. The following entries recount my first night working at Mr. Tweeg's home. 8:41 p.m. I arrived at the Tweeg residence at 7:50 p.m. I pulled up in the circular driveway and noticed the lights were on inside the giant brick white house, but didn't see any other cars. When I spoke to Mrs. Bowe, the care team's head nurse, she clarified I would be alone upon arrival, but would have instructions left for me. At the front entrance, I found an envelope with my first name written on it, and it contained the following letter. Greetings, Mr. Burroughs. Welcome to the residence of Mr. Rudolph Tweeg. We're pleased to have you join our little family. Your shift begins at 8 p.m. sharp. You will be relieved at 5:30 a.m. When you arrive, Mr. Tweeg will have already been fed, bathed, and ready for bed. He has a very simple routine. Upon arrival, Mr. Tweeg will be in the parlor listening to the radio. The dial will be set to AM frequency 101.3. Do not change it. He will stay in the parlor until 8:45 p.m. Move Mr. Tweeg to his study from 8:45 to 9:30 p.m. He likes listening to his audio tapes. Follow the instructions on what tape to play for him that night. At 9 p.m., make sure all windows and doors leading outside are locked. Mr. Tweeg goes to bed at 9:30 p.m. Use the service elevator by the stairway to transport him upstairs. Set his hospital bed at a 25-degree angle. While Mr. Tweeg is asleep, make sure his bedroom door is shut at all times and check in on him every 30 to 45 minutes. In addition, you must follow these 7 important rules. Number 1. There are 9 mirrors in the house. After you put Mr. Tweeg to bed, cover every mirror with a white sheet. Number 2. You may find Mr. Tweeg out of his room after you've put him to bed. If this happens, bring him back to his bedroom and lock the door. Number 3. If you receive a call on the landline from 10:45 to 11:30 p.m., the caller will have a message for Mr. Tweeg. Write it down on the notepad and follow any specific instructions they may give you. Number 4. From 1:09 to 1:51 a.m., stay in Mr. Tweeg's bedroom with the door locked. Otherwise, crawl on all fours if you fail to reach his room before that time. It can't see anything lower than 3 feet from the ground. If it comes near you, don't look up. Number 5. The mannequins in Mr. Tweeg's study like to roam the house after midnight. If you ever find both in the same place, disarm the mannequins and cover them with white sheets. Number 6. Inside the refrigerator is a lidded pot. At 2:59 a.m., set the pot on the top stair leading into the basement. Return for the pot at 3:37 a.m. and put it in the sink. Do not enter the basement under any circumstances. Number 7. If you hear the radio or television turn on, stop what you're doing and move to the second floor immediately. Remain there until it's quiet downstairs. Help yourself to any food or drinks in the kitchen. You may use the television in the den, radio in the parlor, or computer in the study, and you are free to explore the house. Contact the agency's 24-hour line if you need anything. Signed, Mrs. Bowie, head nurse. Mr. Tweed was in the parlor, just as the letter said. He was very frail and had a deathly pale, narrow, wrinkled face with dark circles under his sunken eyes, and a thin arch of scraggly grayish-white hair lining the sides of his bald scalp. He was wearing a plaid wool robe and had another blanket tightly wrapped around his legs. His wheelchair was state-of-the-art. It was able to recline, move vertically up and down, and even had smaller gadgets attached that were monitoring his vitals. While Mr. Tweed's appearance was somewhat unsettling, I did empathize and treated him like any ordinary patient. With a smile, I introduced myself to Mr. Tweed and explained what I would be doing. As expected, Mr. Tweed didn't respond and simply stared straight ahead with his rigid, stony, expressionless look on his face. The radio emitted bursts of static with gargled voices that were utterly indecipherable words and phrases. I double-checked the dial to see if it was indeed set at AM 1013, remembering how I was instructed not to change the channel. I just finished my walkthrough of the house and found additional instructions on where the medical supplies were located, how to operate the service elevator, locations of every door, window, and mirror, along with a set of numbered keys and reference for the use of each one. It's time to bring Mr. Tweed to his study. 10:04 p.m. It took some time, but I just finished covering all the mirrors and am about to make a final sweep of all the windows and doors to make sure they're locked. I completed the rest of Mr. Tweed's routine without incident. The instructions in his study told me to play an audio tape on his cassette player, labeled AF029. I put headphones on Mr. Tweed so I couldn't hear what he was listening to, but could tell by the expression in his eyes he was fully engaged. The mannequins mentioned in Rule 5 were on either side of the bookshelf in his study. They were whitish beige and seemed to embody the female form with completely featureless faces. One had its hands placed on its hip, while the other hand's fingers lightly grasped the bottom of its chin as if the mannequin was in a state of thought. The other mannequin's hands were intertwined behind its head, and it stood in a coy, compelling pose. Both stood on their platforms and had the words Etta and Nina written on them, which I guessed were their names. I noticed Etta had a crack running down the center of its face, while Nina was missing its left index and pinky fingers. I jokingly introduced myself and even asked them not to sneak up on me since I scared easily. The house's rules are quite peculiar the more I think about it, but I wouldn't be surprised if some of them are part of an indoctrination joke they pull on newcomers. I'm anxious to learn more when I speak with Mrs. Bowie, who's worked for Mr. Tweed since before he got sick. I'm sure she knows everything there is about his past and this house. 10:49 p.m. I thought I heard giggling or crying. I couldn't tell which it was. It seemed like it was coming from the walls. I heard it in the kitchen, living room, den, and upstairs hallway. It would appear and fade randomly. I may have just been hearing things. It's an old house, after all. 12:06 a.m. About an hour ago, I received a strange phone call on the house's landline. I probably shouldn't feel this way, since Rule 3 mentioned this might happen. When I answered, there was a lot of static on the other end, eerily similar to the radio station Mr. Tweed was listening to in the parlor. After asking who it was, a deep, raspy male voice with an unidentifiable accent told me to let Mr. Tweed know that everything was going according to plan.